Okay, welcome to the Tyrant-Den. That's an intro I'm working on. So, I was wondering what would happen if I did a reaction video that people might actually see. So, for everyone who's new, and that is anyone watching this, I am the Tyrant of Den. I almost entirely react to strong bad emails right now. If you have no idea what those are, I have a channel you should be checking out. I mean, come over to the den and find out about what people were watching before YouTube was a thing. But once there was a thing in the aughts on the internet to watch, it's like early classic flash animation, and when you see your like 40-year-old uncle cousin say Trogdor a lot or Vorübergods, you'll know what they mean. We haven't actually gotten to Trogdor yet. But also, you get to see what it's like when a guy in his late 20s is trying to learn how to do a reaction channel, because that's obviously where all the money is, in a house that has no good lighting whatsoever to shoot YouTube videos in. It's very fun. It's high quality, very fun. The more important thing is that I update every single day. So there's that. But now I'm going to try reacting to something that people might actually see me react to, since it's a popular channel and I haven't watched it religiously as a child, this particular video. And I've watched enough history YouTube to know a thing or two about King Henry VIII. So let's see what Blue has in store for us.
When presenting history in a public setting, there's a delicate line between putting famous figures on blast for the irresponsible, immoral, or just downright memeable, and falling into the...
Okay, I've got to turn this only up a little bit. I don't want it too high for reactions, but I can barely hear it.
trap of rewarding bad behavior with attention. In this regard, researching a notorious king becomes much like watching over a toddler. No hitting. Hands to yourself, please. Do not put that in your mouth. Negotiate.
Okay, switching from King Henry VIII to Boss Baby. I mean, I might have gone George III, but okay.
For basic manners with a baby is hopeless, and so is expecting any better from a monarch, because they're both playing by a completely different rule set, and you can see it in their eyes that they know it too.
Right? See, there was a classic book I read in elementary school called The Whipping Boy, which the whole concept of the book, I don't know how much that's based on historical thing, but there was a prince who was awful. And it was such a time period where if a son was awful, you would whip them. But he was like the prince. So instead they had some other kid and they would whip that kid until the prince saw the error of his ways. It worked out exactly as well as you'd think it would.
And this is why I spend so few videos recounting the lives of big boy kings and their...
Oh, yeah, that's the other good point, yeah. He specifically claims to try to avoid, what do they call it? Big person history. But of course, you know, most of these are about specific people.
Tonka truck wars. It's just exhausting, and I always feel like I'm rewarding that bad behavior. But today, in the spirit of the Valentine's season, I'm going to talk about love. Or rather,
more loving
whatever the hell Henry VIII was doing. There is some overlap, but boy, is it slight.
When it starts out, and kind of arguably sort of a little bit at the end, it's not there. And The Other Boleyn Girl was a popular book at the time for some reason.
So, to learn the story of England's most notorious lady killer as an object lesson in what never to do, let's do some history.
Okay.
We begin in England in the 1500s as young Prince Hal was an extremely captivating figure, admired in his day for his athleticism.
Do we just call like every Henry Hal? That's just another one of those weird nicknames I never got. Because I know they call Henry V Hal all the time in Shakespeare, at least. Is that... Hey, if I'm actually getting people this time, I can get responses in the comments. Tell me, is Hal just an old nickname for Henry over there?
Charm, and good looks. Sure. He's at once
I don't know. Are they gonna maybe reference his ankles or his legs or whatever? I know in Absolute History Extra Credits or whichever one that was, they do a whole little bit where they talk about how famous Henry VIII's ankles were.
better and worse than we're liable to give him credit for. A multilingual and multi-talented king, he was an artistic patron and participant in the Renaissance tradition. He was also full of a royally insatiable appetite for food and women alike. Those traits were only matched by his impulsiveness, arrogance, and self-obsession. He got bored easily and was as distrustful as he was covetous. Henry...
I mean, basically. Okay. Really, it's... When you put, like, these descriptions together, he doesn't even sound that special. Like, I feel like we've all known someone who is both all of those admirable traits and all of the hot nonsense traits. Yeah, I feel like these kind of wind up going together. Like, we all know the self-obsessed, easily bored artist type. Okay, actually... Okay, now when I just think of him as that archetype of the self-obsessed, easily bored artist, it actually all comes clicking together in perfect, horrifying, narcissistic logic. Oh boy.
Henry's paranoia led to the death of queens, officials, religious dissenters, and nearly every advisor who ever served him. Yet, for the first 2 decades of his reign, he was popular in his court and among the subjects, in large part because he played the royal jock while his father's advisors and one...
The royal jock who also wrote music.
Notoriously corrupt Cardinal Wolsey ran the kingdom. But even early...
I know he's an actual person, and some of what he did I respect. And I respect the stuff he didn't do even more. But, like, Cardinal Wolsey just feels like the most possibly British name for a cardinal ever. Cardinal Wolsey.
Early on, he couldn't leave well enough alone. Bored of being merely a celebrity, Henry wanted to get the blood rushing by winning glory. So, as ever, the clearest option was in France. Yet, as ever, it did not work.
France. It's like Scotland, but with more glory. As in, by like Scotland, I mean England's going to declare war on it. It's been a hot second.
Costing the entire treasury in one go and only proving that poor tiny England absolutely could not compete with the great powers of Europe. So, with great frustration, he turned his focus back to England. And this would prove especially bad news for his wife, Catherine of Aragon, as it's here where Henry's reign surpasses the generically inept and descends into the true hallmark of his career, religion-shattering horniness. Now, before we progress, it is my historian's responsibility to remind you that people are complicated and memes are not. So we're on the receiving end of a 500-year gossip circle that we ourselves perpetuate every time we laugh at old King Sixwives instead of thinking through what the history meant for the actual human people who lived it. Henry certainly belongs in horny jail, but we can't pat ourselves on the back if we reduce an extremely consequential chapter of English history to the joke answer. So let's consider, what did Henry want? In a word?
Okay, so, because historian YouTubers always act like they know what they're talking about, despite not being the ones making the video because they're not actual historians. They just watch lots of stories. So let's cover what we already know about Henry going into this, and Aragon, about how she was originally betrothed to his older brother. I think it was Arthur. And that would have been a much objectively cooler name to have as a king of England for obvious reasons, instead of an 8th Henry. Arthur dies. Henry gets Catherine of Aragon, but according to a lot of people, they think despite she was much older, the age gap, he did actually intensely love her. So we are getting that love is not in this story. Love is in some ways intrinsic to the story, but, well, I'm quite certain that Blue here will get into how it doesn't work out, the love bit.
A son. Henry grew up in the wake of the War of the Roses and was acutely aware of how catastrophic the line of succession would get without a clear male heir. His Tudor dynasty was new and it was not guaranteed to stay in power. Henry was married to the stately Queen Catherine of Aragon, but after
it's very obvious what he should do. He should do what every Crusader Kings 3-player does and just throw several feasts and hunts and build up that prestige and then just change the inheritance law. Actually, he kind of does do that.
after 2 decades of marriage, no son. Lots of infant mortality and
He does it wrong, but he does kind of. I'm just saying, if you're gonna essentially make your own religion, make it a cool one, or adopt atomism.
one daughter Mary who survived to adulthood, but Henry figured that wouldn't cut it in a fiercely patriarchal society like medieval Europe. Catherine had been a good queen and a good wife, but once she was past childbearing years, Henry had no use for her. He had plenty of mistresses, but illegitimate sons would do him no good either. What he needed was a brand new wife, and people had...
So I'm guessing Blue doesn't really buy into the theory that he did really love Catherine of Aragon. I'm sorry, Lord of the Rings fan, I'm just going to want to say Aragon. Her country has a cooler name than she does.
Done this before. Divorce, per se, was not recognized by the church, but you could get an annulment where the Pope says, oh, that marriage? Yeah, that never happened. You've actually been single the whole time. In fact, Catherine was first married to Henry's brother.
Don't think... Does Crusader Kings 3 have an annulment, Earl? I don't know, I just immediately switch to or create a religion where I can just divorce whenever I want. Like Henry's going to, kind of.
But after he died, the marriage was annulled so she could marry Henry. But this time, the Pope was unmovable. Diplomacy, bargaining, saying pretty please, Rome would not budge. In Europe, Henry was powerless. But in England...
Okay, I'm actually kind of curious. I mean, there's lots of reasons why the Pope wouldn't do it. I'm just wondering what those were. Maybe he was actually devout and could only bullshit it so much. Maybe he was nervous about an upstart island power abusing the power of the Pope and therefore weakening his position. But, like, I don't really know. It's like, that's always... The Pope is very much treated as a MacGuffin in this story. He's just the guy who didn't do the thing, so Henry has to do the things.
And he was the one in charge. In 1532, a decade and a half after Martin Luther woke up and chose mayhem, Henry broke with Rome and declared that the church in England was answerable only to the king. Some of Henry's advisors...
It feels like the opposite of what he was trying to do, but at the same time, it's very much what happened. You don't make a very clearly well thought. On one hand, you don't. Okay, yeah, it's had to edit there. Like on one hand, you don't make up what was apparently a very well and thought out list of reasonable issues and how to address them. Expecting mayhem. On the other hand, you don't... I mean, I don't know what the time period was, but you don't, like, tack them onto a door not expecting some mayhem. It's a very public and loud way of addressing things at the end of the day.
Luther woke up and chose mayhem. Henry broke with Rome and declared that the church in England was answerable only to the king. Some of Henry's advisors objected, so naturally...
Not exactly Protestant, just Protestant-inspired. Protestant taking advantage of...
Henry had them killed, and some Catholics in the North rebelled, so naturally Henry had them crushed as well. Everyone else carried on with their day for fear of the harsh new anti-treason laws. And with that, Henry had his church, his annulment, and his new wife, Anne Boleyn. She had been a court lady to Catherine, and when Henry started making kissy faces at her, she refused to be a mistress and insisted he marry her properly before any slamming was to begin. Honestly, well played.
Yeah.
A few very short months after their marriage, Anne gave birth to the future Queen Elizabeth.
That's a game you gotta respect. Elizabeth. Talk about game that you have to respect.
But that was it.
Before we can get to a game that you have to respect, let's switch to the parents where you learn what not to do from.
Uh-oh. In the midst of all that,
Well, I mean, you could definitely make a connection to Elizabeth, continuing to just not marry people to get them to give her favors, with her mother not accepting mistresshood until she became queen. I mean, there's parallels there.
Henry was struggling to reconfigure his monarchy now that he was the head of the Church of England. He became responsible for giving alms to the poor and happily confiscated all of the old church lands. However, he had neither the time nor patience for another sonless wife. Blissfully unaware of how chromosomal genetics actually works, he concluded that this marriage was also cursed and had her annulled, and executed for adultery and treason.
Yes, because nothing is going to make a marriage less cursed than another annulment and killing them. Anywho, I mean, it's the classic, ooh, that black cat is probably owned by a witch. Clearly, the best possible thing we could do is kill the black cat. I don't get people.
Then,
It's like the thing you see on Elfin Lied, where it's like, hey, we think that this girl might have psychic powers which would let her kill us. Let's torment her until she kills us. Oh, no. Actually, I don't know if that's the case in Elfin Lied. I know that that's the case in Fruits Basket. It's like, hey, Hanajima, we heard that you sent a kid to the hospital with psychic powers that are apparently just a thing in this world we're not really going to discuss. Let's torment you until you do it to one of us. Why? What is the logic with these stupid kids? Anyway, speaking of stupid kids, King Henry VIII.
Thanks. This kind of frivolous cruelty also undermines the entire hoist of doing Protestantism in the first place, which frankly is typical Henry.
Yeah, that is the kind of thing I always wonder, like, oh, I'm going to change religion so I can divorce and annul my wives easier without having to kill them. And then he does so anyway. Which is the biggest point of me giving any credit to the whole, the theory that at one point in a jousting match he hit his head really hard and supposedly more of his crazy behavior started happening after that. But let's face it, the guy was probably a narcissist beforehand because he was a king.
Henry's subsequent betrothal to Jane Seymour the next day would finally net him the son he always wanted.
You don't have time. Anyone who's played Crusader Kings knows that you don't have time to waste after you lose one wife. You got to get the next one. It's a time limit thing here. Come on.
Never mind what Edward VI was like as king, because he'd be succeeded 7 years later by Mary and Elizabeth anyway, so this whole exhausting ordeal is the result of one man's paranoia, lust, and...
Did I miss something?
Henry's subsequent betrothal to Jane Seymour the next day would finally net him the son he always wanted. Never mind what Edward VI was like as king, because he'd be succeeded 7 years later by Mary and Elizabeth anyway, so this whole exhausting ordeal is the result of one man's paranoia, lust, and enthusiasm for beheadings. But with the mission finally complete, do you know what happens to Jane Seymour? She died of an infection 2 weeks later. I don't know whether to be sad for her awful luck or relieved that she didn't live to see what it's like when Henry got a whiff of someone else's perfume. I guess that's the way of putting it.
Okay, what does it say? Rest in peace, Jane Seymour. You gave Henry the male heir he always wanted, and then courteously spared Henry the cost of the annulment papers and the executioner's hourly fee. His Highness the King is most grateful for missing one word there. Supreme efficiency. And I'm keeping these up in case I taught for Taco Room, but you still want to hear what Kelby's saying. I'm keeping the captions up. We'll see how that works.
But with his beloved bloodline preserved, Henry turned back to foreign policy.
Which anyone who's played CK3 or many of the other Kingdom games knows that it's not preserved. You got to have at least 2 kings, heir and the spare. Henry should know he was the spare. But sure, turn to foreign policy. Really. As if there isn't a perfectly good... Okay, yeah. Okay, I mean, with all respect to Scotland and Ireland, you were not worth the effort, and that's a double-sided thing at that point, because you were both very, very, very hard to actually conquer, I think, at the time, versus the quality for land. I mean, we know that Scotland's freaking valuable now. Now we know they have oil.
Policy and failed just as badly as he did when he was a teenager. He wanted a German Protestant wife as a check against Emperor Charles V and chose Anne of Cleves in 1540.
I guess they just... You gotta tie England with Germany. Because the Hanovers.
Mail-order bride he picked from a portrait gallery. But Henry McSloops suddenly got all choosy and annulled the marriage the same year because Anne didn't look enough like her portrait. Rude. That said, this ended a lot better than...
I do... Yeah, that's another one you gotta appreciate, that you didn't look as good as you did in your portrait. I appreciate how far that goes back. I feel like you could make one of those, like a comic strip of that. Guy complaining about the dating profile, guy complaining about the ad in the magazine paper, however they did mail order brides, guy complaining about the portrait, like guy complaining about the painting on the vase of ancient Hellas.
And it very easily could have, so let's take the win.
And spent the next 17 years living it up at the two palaces with all the privileges of a royal family member, but with absolutely none of the responsibilities, which is the way to do it, or implicit marital dangers, not the way to do it. Associated with being Queen Anne of Cleves, was full-on boss. Good for her. I agree.
And move on. He next married Catherine Howard. There was a religious strategy to this. I don't care. And he eventually had her executed for adultery as well. Restraint? In this kingdom? Speaking of, he started some wars again. Didn't super work.
To quote him from a previous video on the subject, Scotland who hurt you. To your question, it was England. Yeah, despite the Puritan Reformation, Oliver Cromwell's best efforts. Anyway, Oliver Cromwell didn't even show restraint. Let's be honest. Like, he seems like the guy who theoretically would be the most restrained because Puritanism, but then nothing he did was restrained.
Plus, the treasury was back to empty. Ah well, let's meet the last wife. Catherine Parr was a Protestant widow who served as regent while...
Catherine Parr. There's got to be a pun there. Instead, I'm going to suggest that Mr. Incredible is a great descendant of Catherine Parr.
Henry was at war in France and made a point to formalize Mary and Elizabeth's places in the royal succession, thus making Catherine Parr the actual MVP of the Tudor dynasty. In any case, it was...
Hold on. I missed a bit again. I missed a bit. I was talking when I should be pausing.
And made a point to formalize Mary and Elizabeth's places in the royal succession, thus making Catherine Parr the actual MVP of the Tudor dynasty.
Yeah,
in any case,
yeah. That's okay. I'm realizing now if oh dang, if Catherine didn't formalize the succession of two daughters who were not hers, oh dang. There's your what if video. Don't go making a freaking what if video. If a landmass that definitely never could have existed, here's something that could have happened based on nothing, by my own admission. No, this is this. What freaking happens if Catherine Parr didn't legitimize two daughters who weren't even hers? That's the juicy stuff. I'm sorry, I'm complaining about a different video.
It was good timing because 4 years later, Henry died, leaving our last Catherine to live her best life. Oh, what a mess.
Good
King
game.
with his priorities so twisted.
Again, that good game is for Parr, not for Henry VIII. Henry VIII is a very bad Crusader Kings 3 playthrough.
The nuts. He wasn't sure whom he wanted to marry or kill, so he did everything to everyone and called it a day. Henry's 38 years on the throne were some of England's most consequential due to his sweeping reforms of church and state, but all that...
Which is another thing, is, you know, if he just didn't freaking do that freaking war with France, and there's your other alternate history, a less interesting one on that, but like, you know, if he didn't do the War of France, he tried to dig into the you know, they had the big peace games in Golden Summit or whatever with the Prince of France, if they tried to keep it there and tried to maintain some peace there, and he instead just kept focusing on reforms, admittedly, he would have been a very unfamous king. Yeah, so he was never going to do that. But, like, he would have been one of those kings, like, now, where, like, a very select period group of historians would, like, have realized, oh, there's this one specifically non-disaster king who did a bunch of very boring, good things. We love him. I know there's, like, a couple of Roman empires like that who I would love, but I don't remember them because Nero, Caligula, Commodus, Tiberius, they get all the drama. Like, he could have been such a non-drama king. Like, Elizabeth would have loved to be a non-drama queen, but that was not the deck of cards she was out. He was given a great hand of cards to be a badass non-drama king. He was given a very boring hand of cards. He should have, sat there and played kind of smart, bluffed a little bit, and then could have carefully won a small but modest hand and dealt out. Instead, he played like, I don't know, poker enough to make a good altar. It said he was like he had he had like an ace, one high card ace, and tried to play it like it was a straight flush. That's what it is. And not when I say that, I mean he tried to play it like that. I don't mean he tried to bluff like that. You can make a great argument that like that's the kind of thing Elizabeth was doing to horribly break and mangle this already broken metaphor. He was trying to play like it was literally straight flush, like he could win with a high card ace. I don't know where we're going with this. I'm not in a CK3 game because I guess I keep bringing that one up. I don't know, CK3 game. Somehow you were playing as somehow you were playing as par, and you won. Okay, I know it is. In a CK3 game, you really liked the guy you were playing. You really the player really liked playing Henry V, but then Henry V died before you got to do something really cool and solidify all his gains in France, and then you kind of wind up losing. And then you basically tried to redo Henry V with Henry VIII, even though his stats were obviously not built for that. The situation was obviously not built for that. You had a great technological advancement on France when you were playing Howe, because you just got the British longbowmen, and then France, they had nothing to counter that. Meanwhile, now you're kind of equal. Like maybe you have a little more skill here or there with some things, but generally France has better resources and more people, and you're trying to do an aggressive war overseas on land that's just bigger than yours. So all your money is going down the drain. Meanwhile, it's just bad luck at the trot. You're not getting the male heir, which is a pain. Which is why he should have gone Adamus or whatever it's called. Still being kind of Christian enough that Christian was going to directly declare war on you. You could still kind of make some marriages, and you could just marry and unmarry freely. But again, that's the CK3 game. If he actually tried to switch to the all-nudist religion in England, I'm sure that wouldn't have worked. But I'm just saying, like, you're already changing the religion. And then what's like, why was he? That's the thing I can't. That's the thing you can't justify when you try to switch into the game. Why was he still executing them? Was he like that nervous they were going to pull off a successful assassination attempt if he just annulled them? Because I guess. Yeah, especially Anne Boleyn, because she would still be related to Elizabeth, and actually, now I think it makes a lot of sense that Parr would have legitimized the two of them, because I mean, if you watch some of the other videos, you know that she would not be actively trying to have trying to do anything with intimate cuddlings with Henry VIII more than she had to, because he had the big leaky infected leg among everything else. It probably wouldn't have worked even if they went through all that effort. Um, so her best chance to stay living the good life was to make sure as many potential inheritors of the throne felt indebted to her as possible. So that's just continuing a good game thing. And then, if we're assuming that somehow this is all a video game again, if this is all just playthrough, it makes sense. I think you don't want to get bogged down. If you're playing CK3 and you really want to roleplay it, you don't want to think that literally whoever the king, queen, emperor is literally the one making all the decisions. You got to assume that people in your small council and your spouses are contributing to a lot of the decisions you're making, if not doing it themselves. So that's just kind of weird. Okay, let's let Blue finish this up.
Sprang from the remarkable women whom he called queen. These six stick in our minds because of Henry's distinct notoriety, but any prominence he has in English.
Yeah, let's take a moment to look at them and respect them, because they all played the game. And I don't think any of them did bad. They just let's go to D&D. Now you're playing. Now you got one person trying to play a legitimate game against one guy who's just a crazy, chaotic, evil murder hobo, and everybody's too polite to try and get rid of him. Also, you're all playing at his house, and he's the one who supplies the snacks, so it's really nice. You kind of really can't get rid of him. But dang it, he keeps killing he keeps killing one of the players, and absolutely ruining the campaign.
History is owed quite thoroughly to the captivating effect they had on him, and in turn, on us. And so we've come full circle to our starting comparison. Like monarch, like toddler, they want their mommy. Thank you for watching. Before I go wash my mouth out with soap for that mommy joke.
Yeah, you should.
I'll give my
it didn't even really
seal
work.
of approval to Six the Musical, because what it...
Huh. Silverfall 6 the Musical.
lacks an analysis of the geopolitical and theological factors that contributed to the English Reformation, it more than makes up for in raw queenly vibes, and is well worth the watch for the characters and music alone. It won't teach you all the history, but it makes the past really come alive, and that is a rare treat.
Okay, that sounds nice. Okay, so if you'd liked that, I've got other videos looking at a classic piece of internet history, and I'm updating pretty much every day. This has been the Tyrant of Den.